Shock victory for Joe Biden on Super Tuesday. Biden won 10 states to Bernie's 4 in one of the most dramatic election turnarounds in history. Just a few days ago, it looked like Bernie Sanders was going to dominate this election, but 48 hours changed everything. How did this happen? Does Bernie even stand a chance now? And what does Bernie Sanders need to do to stay in the running? Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, this election was a blowout. But it's closer than you think. Biden won decisively in Alabama, 63-16, Arkansas, 40-22, North Carolina, 43-24, Oklahoma, 38-25, Tennessee, 41-24, Virginia, 53-23. But in some states, it was closer, with Maine going just 34-33 in favor of Joe Biden, Massachusetts 33-26, Minnesota 38-29, and Texas going 34-30. And of course, Bernie also won by overwhelming margins in Colorado 36-23, Utah 34-17, his home state of Vermont 50-22, and of course, delegate-rich California 33-24. And this means that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are now neck and neck in the delegate count, with 566 delegates for Joe Biden and 501 for Bernie, with 1,991 needed to win the nomination. So all is not lost for Bernie. But how did this turnaround happen in just 48 hours? Well, it all started in South Carolina. On Friday, Bernie was in the lead and Biden had to show that he still had it in him. So just days before the South Carolina primary, South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, who is massively popular in South Carolina, endorsed Joe Biden, which propelled him to an overwhelming victory in South Carolina, beating Bernie 48-19. This gave Joe Biden momentum going into Super Tuesday, and what happened in the next 48 hours solidified the election for him. Tom Steyer dropped out. Then on Monday, suddenly Pete Buttigieg dropped out and endorsed Biden. Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Biden.
I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden.
Beto O'Rourke endorsed Biden, and they all directed their supporters to vote for Joe Biden on Super Tuesday. The establishment coalesced around Joe Biden, giving him all the momentum he needed. The person who orchestrated all this? Barack Obama. And in one fell swoop, the establishment strikes back. What made Biden win is that large numbers of voters decided last minute who to vote for, and of those who decided last minute, they overwhelmingly went for Biden, because of the establishment uniting behind him. And what makes it even tougher for Bernie is that Michael Bloomberg has now also dropped out and endorsed Biden. It's now essentially a two-man race. It's important to know, however, that although Bernie only got around 30% of the vote in most of the states on Super Tuesday, it's not because people don't like him or because they disagree with him on the issues. In fact, exit polls show that a majority of voters on Super Tuesday agree with Bernie Sanders when it comes to universal health care. And Bernie has the highest favorability ratings among the Democratic Party at 74%. But people went for Joe Biden because they think he's the most electable, that he can beat Trump. In short, he's the safe option. Bernie needs to show not only that he's good on the issues, people already agree with him on that, but that he can beat Trump. One other factor contributed to Biden's win on Super Tuesday: Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is a progressive candidate just like Bernie Sanders, and while all the other moderate candidates dropped out and endorsed Biden, Elizabeth Warren did not drop out and endorse her fellow progressive Bernie Sanders. Essentially, Elizabeth Warren is a spoiler candidate. in most of the states where the race was close, she split the vote and took votes from Bernie. In Texas, Biden was ahead by less than 4 points. Elizabeth Warren got 11% of the vote. If even half of that vote had gone to Bernie, he would have won the state. The same happened in Massachusetts. Biden was ahead by 7 points. Warren got 21%. If even half of those had gone to Bernie, he would have won the state. And in almost every other state that was close, this happened. Elizabeth Warren has no reason to be in the race. She won almost no delegates, and she couldn't even win her home state of Massachusetts. Yet even after Super Tuesday, she has announced her intention to stay in the race. Warren is supposed to be an ally of Bernie and the progressive movement. Yet for the last 2 months, she has done her best to get in the way of Bernie Sanders, even accusing him of being sexist at the debate in January. What has she been offered to engage in this behavior? Because at this point, she has no path to victory and is only functioning as a spoiler candidate. Indeed, one wonders how it's possible that 3 candidates dropped out and endorsed Biden in less than 48 hours. Now, I suspect that Pete and Amy, and maybe Warren, have been offered the position of vice president by Joe Biden, or maybe a cabinet position in his administration. And this brings me to the next topic. What does Bernie Sanders need to do if he still wants to have a shot at the nomination? Well, number 1 is to get rid of Elizabeth Warren. She's a spoiler candidate, and I think the only thing he can do now is to offer her the vice presidential position, make her his running mate, in exchange for her dropping out and endorsing him. That way, her progressive voters will line up behind Bernie, because at this point all the moderate voters are backing Biden, and the progressive vote is split. On top of that, whereas Sanders wins mostly working-class voters of all races, Warren wins with upper-middle-class college-educated whites. If she endorses him, she could bring these new voters into Bernie's coalition. Number 2, electability. Many of the voters already agree with Sanders on the issues. He now needs to convince them that he can win against Trump. That's the number 1 issue that voters care about. He needs to show voters that he not only beats Trump in the polls, which he does, more so than Joe Biden, but why. You see, Bernie can argue that only he has the enthusiasm and grassroots movement that can bring out the 4.4 million people who voted for Obama in 2012 and didn't show up for Hillary Clinton in 2016. He needs to argue that in an anti-establishment era, someone like Joe Biden, who represents the status quo and has corruption scandals involving his son that Trump will take advantage of, will lose. And only an anti-establishment candidate like Bernie can go up against that. And he needs to point out that Trump won by railing against the trade deals that outsourced jobs in the Rust Belt states. While Joe Biden supported these trade deals and outsourcing, Bernie opposed the trade deals, which makes him uniquely poised to win those Rust Belt states back for the Democratic Party. Especially since the primary in Michigan, a Rust Belt state, is next Tuesday. He needs to make this argument now. And he needs to show voters that he's not an extremist. Many people are scared to vote for Bernie because they think a democratic socialist can't win an election. He needs to show voters that he's not an extremist, but that his positions are in fact in the mainstream of American opinion, which they are. A majority of American voters want a $15 minimum wage. A majority of Americans want free college tuition. And a majority of Americans want a Medicare for all universal healthcare system. These are mainstream opinions. But if Biden is able to portray Bernie as an unelectable extremist, Biden will win. That's why, instead of constantly labeling himself a socialist and talking about Denmark, Bernie needs to root his vision in fundamental American values and in the story of America. You see, Bernie's ideas are not foreign or radical or even new. They are merely a continuation of the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who introduced Social Security, the New Deal, and the minimum wage. Bernie needs to show that his social programs are not scary socialism like in Venezuela, but simply a continuation of the kind of social programs established by FDR.
The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health.
John F. Kennedy.
We are behind every country pretty nearly in Europe in this matter of medical care for our citizens.
And Lyndon B. Johnson and other Democrats, in a way that are fundamentally American. Number 3, he needs to expand his base. About 30% of the electorate is behind Sanders. He needs to bring that number up to 50%. Bernie won big with working class voters, young people, and Latinos. But he hasn't done so well with older voters, suburban voters, rural voters, or older black voters. So he needs to talk about the issues that appeal to these people. Old people in America depend on Social Security, the government pension that everyone gets. Bernie needs to hammer down on Joe Biden's terrible record on Social Security, using ads like this.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time.
Well, we've got some bad news for them. We are not going to cut Social Security. We're going to expand benefits.
That's a good start, but Bernie also needs to show his anti-establishment credentials by drawing contrast with Joe Biden. He doesn't just need to say, for example, that Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War and he didn't. But he needs to say why. The reason that people like Joe Biden and other establishment politicians vote for all these wars or for laws that benefit big corporations instead of working people is because politicians like Joe Biden have their campaigns funded by billionaires, corporations, and other special interests. And so when it comes time to making policy, the policies are made in the interests of the elite. Until now, Bernie has only been tepidly criticizing Joe Biden, calling him my friend before every attack. Now he needs to take off the gloves and call out what is essentially a kind of legalized corruption or buying influence in the political system. In short, Bernie still has a chance to win this, but the odds are getting slim. The establishment is united against him. He needs to play hardball and be tough on Joe Biden. He needs to expand his base and show voters that he is electable. And he needs to find a way to get either Elizabeth Warren or her voters on his side. Tell me what you think, guys. Like, share, and subscribe. 'Cause this was my take.